Joey was a 23-year-old young man who loved going on walks. One day, Joey was walking around his neighborhood when he noticed a man staring at him, smiling in the distance. And it wasn't just a smile, it was the worst smile you've ever seen. Joey ignored the man and kept walking, but noticed two other people staring and smiling at him. Joey was so confused and thought they were laughing at him, but as he got closer, he noticed the smile on their faces was extremely sinister. At this point, Joey was scared and started walking faster. But things kept getting stranger. Every person Joey walked by was staring at him with a chilling smile on their faces. Joey began to run, but everyone began running after him with the smile still on their faces. As Joey approached his house, a pack of smiling people followed. Joey then woke up in a pool of sweat in his bed. He then turned over to check his phone when he noticed something in the corner of his room. He stared in fear as a man with a smile on his face looked at him.
Remember in Scarface, the beginning scene when like the drug deal goes wrong? Manny, he's in the getaway car and he's being distracted by a girl in like a blue bikini. She's blonde. You remember? Her name was Tammy Lynn Leopard. And after she recorded her scenes in that movie, she ended up disappearing and still to this day was never found. What the I'm gonna give a little context. As she got older, she ended up getting into modeling and a little bit of acting. She ended up landing a role in the movie called Spring Break.
I've heard about it before.
After the movie was done filming, her and the crew got invited to an after party. She ended up going there alone. After she came back from the party, her family, her mother would say that she started acting completely different and she became more paranoid. At the party, she ended up seeing something that she wasn't supposed to see, and that someone was looking for her and was worried that once they found her that they would kill her. She still didn't say what she saw, but knowing like in the context of Diddy, I'm pretty sure we could imagine what the fuck she probably saw. And she ends up getting a role in Scarface. Everything was normal until the 4th day of filming, and one of the scenes it showed someone being shot. It looked really realistic, but I guess since she's new to this, she ended up.
This is one of the worst pedophiles in American history, and he was never brought to justice. Meet Frank Sheldon from northern Detroit. In the 1970s, Frank Sheldon was running a pedophile ring off of this island, North Fox Island in northern Michigan. Frank Sheldon had previously purchased the island in the 1960s, and in the 1970s he turned this island into a child porn production hotspot. You see, Frank had installed a private airstrip on the island, so he and other pedophiles would fly kids onto the island, sexually assault them on camera, and then fly them home. But after one of his co-conspirators was arrested, Frank Sheldon flew out of America and was never brought to justice. That's right, he flew to a foreign country where he started up another pedophile ring, and then he died a free man. North Fox Island was huge news at the time, but in the past few decades, nobody's really talked about it. And I wonder why. There's no justice for the children of North Fox Island, and it's still unknown how many victims there were. Hundreds, thousands, we don't know. But to me, it's disgusting that this pedophile was allowed to go free, was never caught or arrested for his crimes, and died a free man, facing no repercussions for the hundreds, if not thousands of children that he harmed.
Chablis was the manager of a farm that all of his friends worked on, and one day they all got into a very big argument. And a couple days after the argument, these so-called friends did the unthinkable. They all went to where Chablis was at and then kidnapped him and asked him for money from his parents. Chablis' parents ended up giving them money, and his friends, the kidnappers, assured them that Chablis would be home safely by the morning. But that did not happen. They ended up killing Chablis and then cooked his flesh and meat and ate him since Chablis saw their faces. The police interrogated many suspects, and one of them confessed and showed them the area where Chablis was killed. Police searched the area and found Chablis' bone fragments and skull. Yu Mung Chung Marma was arrested as the mastermind behind the murder, and when he was taken to the crime scene, an angry mob of villagers surrounded the police car and pulled him out. They all then savagely lynched him to death. It turns out Yu Mung killed Chablis before even contacting his parents for money, which makes it that much worse. This case is just sickening, and it's crazy what people would do for money, especially to their own friends. May Chablis rest in peace. You did not deserve this at all.
YouTuber faked a live stream in order to give himself an alibi while he was murdering his girlfriend. This man's name was Stephen McCullough. His videos would be centered around tour reviews and specifically on the show Doctor Who. I'm gonna show you the videos as well. The one with the beard.
All you do is put coins in the sock.
Yeah, no, kind of
bait
off.
Bro.
What is the drop zone?
Nah.
Steven was dating a woman named Natalie McNally, and she was pregnant with their first child. December 19th, she was found beaten and stabbed to death. He was the main suspect in the beginning, but he used the live stream as an alibi, saying during this time I was live streaming. And you can see on YouTube,
You literally see me on camera fucking playing video games.
exactly, they just let him go because it made sense. And everything seemed in his favor until investigators watched the actual live stream, and the stream is called the Violent Night stream.
You still watch the stream?
Yes, it's up. It's 6 hours long. In the stream, it was Steven just playing mainly GTA Vice City. Basically poking fun at
What he just did.
what he's gonna do in the future.
That's why I like sticking to just doing crimes in a video game. Because I'm a bit of a sadistic bastard, I suppose. But then again, it's a video game, you know. It's not like it's got real world consequences, so who gives a fuck? I need to kill this bitch.
Hold on, it gets even crazier, bro.
This Taco Bell sign crushed somebody to death. In March 2010 in Nebraska, Diane Durr and her husband were on an ordinary drive, meeting someone to sell dogs. They agreed to meet at a parking lot of a Taco Bell, a seemingly normal location, but danger loomed overhead. At 80 feet tall and weighing nearly 1,500 pounds, the Taco Bell sign was a towering landmark. But that day, gusts of wind reached up to 60 miles per hour and it rattled its structure, which caused cracks in its steel support pole. Unaware of the danger overhead, Diane and her husband parked directly underneath the sign. They talked and waited for the buyer to arrive as the wind was whipping through the parking lot around them. Then it happened. With a loud thunderous crack, the sign's steel pole gave away. In an instant, the enormous sign plummeted towards the ground directly above their car. The impact was catastrophic. The 1,500-pound sign crashed through the car's roof, shattering glass and crushing the cabin. Diana was killed instantly, her body pinned beneath the wreckage. Her husband sat just inches away, frozen in shock, with his face covered in blood from the shards of glass. First responders arrived to find a scene of unimaginable devastation. The car was unrecognizable, mangled beneath the enormous sign. Diane's husband, though alive, could only stare in horror at the twisted wreckage as his wife was gone in an instant.
Video that was surfacing throughout the internet and shit, and it was about a jinn who had interrupted a conversation on live TV.
Oh, okay.
So, live show where people call in and basically just ask questions and stuff. But this specific show is a Muslim show.
So it's not related to no spiritual stuff or no like scary
No.
stuff.
It's mainly focused on Islam, Muslim
Okay.
beliefs and stuff. And people call in to speak to the sheikh.
Okay.
I don't really know how to pronounce it. And his name is Abu Muhammad. A woman calls. At first, it's a regular like conversation and shit. But then stuff starts getting weird.
Allah's name on the left leg. Also,
On the edge right now.
Just keep watching.
I'm sorry, I can't speak now.
بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا. Give her the power to continue her speech, Ya Allah.
The visa, one front of my pillow,
Oh
one
my
to carry
god,
with
bro.
me.
Who created you and why? Huh?
She ended up saying bat.
Baal? B-A-A-L? The fucking demon?
What they're saying that was a jinn, which it's not a demon, it's not an angel or anything like that. It's just another spirit that could choose whether it wants to be evil or whether it wants to do good.
I'm all they have. Right now, they have not been able to rule anyone out. I don't think I'm any more of a suspect than anyone in this case right now.
It's very painful.
The woman you just saw in that video, Susan Smith, murdered both of her children in the year 1994. Now, this case eerily echoes a more recent case, the Chris Watts case, and that's because Susan Smith murdered her two children and then went on national TV begging for someone to come forward with answers about what happened to her kids. Yes, that clip at the beginning was Susan and her husband David, and she was on television stating she had no idea what happened to her kids. However, it was eventually discovered that Susan had parked near a lake, John D. Long Lake, and allowed her car to roll into the lake containing her two young children, Michael and Alex. Tragically, the boys were trapped in the car as the water submerged them, and that's unfortunately how they both died, terrified, screaming, and alone in the dark. Now, Susan initially claimed that she was carjacked by a black man, but Susan's story didn't make sense. She said that she had stopped her car at a red light at an empty intersection. However, it was later determined that that light would only turn red if there was another car present, so she had been lying. And eventually, after making dramatic pleas on national television for 9 days, Susan Smith admitted that she was the one who murdered her own 2 children. To this day, Susan Smith continues to try to get out of prison, but thankfully her attempts to get herself released keep getting blocked. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms, and we actually did an episode on Susan Smith with the full story. And we were actually featured on Nightline recently because of our efforts covering this case.
This teenager thought a sleep deprivation experiment would be a good test of endurance. The results were more disturbing than anyone expected. Ray Gardner was born in San Diego in California. In December 1963, at just 17 years old, he set out to shock the world. He wanted to attempt to break a world record. He thought he was going to be able to stay awake longer than anybody had before. However, he hadn't considered the extreme impact of this test. The previous world record was held by a man called Tom Rounds. He kept his eyes open for a staggering 260 hours. On the 28th of December, Randy's experiment began. He was monitored throughout to obviously make sure that he was really staying awake and there was no cheating. He managed to stay awake for an eye-watering 11 days. This works out at 264 hours, beating the previous world record. The results, though, were shocking. Andy appeared to be coping quite well at first, and even excelled at tasks such as pinball. However, he soon began to deteriorate. He experienced mood swings and significant memory loss. During one task, when he had to do some maths conundrums, he actually stopped midway through one of the sums and just said that he'd completely forgotten what he was actually doing. His speech started slurring and he was experiencing hallucinations. He became quite paranoid too, even once the experiment had concluded and Randy had gone to sleep on the 8th of January. The first time he closed his eyes, he went to sleep for 14 hours. However, he then really suffered with insomnia. This was evident for decades after he'd completed the world record. Now, due to how dangerous the side effects of lack of sleep are, the Guinness World Records have even stopped including it. Their policy states that they now do not include any information about sleep deprivation.
This woman became so obsessed with true crime that she brutally murdered someone just out of curiosity. This story needs a massive trigger warning, as this photo is not what it seems. This is Young Yu Young, a 23-year-old woman described as a recluse who lived with her grandfather in South Korea. Young became so obsessed with true crime TV shows and books that she spent months plotting the murder of a stranger. She finally settled on a victim who was 26 years old and whose name has never been publicly released after contacting 54 other women on a tutoring app. She posed as a mother who was looking for someone to teach her daughter English, and she would message each tutor to see if they taught lessons alone and out of their own home. After contacting 54 other women, she finally found her victim, who did in fact live alone and agreed to help her daughter. So she set up a date in May of this year and arrived to the victim's home in Busan, posing as a young student dressed in a school uniform. And when the victim let her in, she proceeded to stab her over 100 times, most of which occurred after the victim was already dead. Young then went to the store to purchase garbage bags and bleach, and then she returned back to the home where she dismembered the victim. She even cut off her fingers in an attempt to delay identification. Young then stuffed the body parts into suitcases, changed into the victim's clothes, and was seen on CCTV going in and out of the victim's home multiple times with the bloodstained suitcase. She then called a taxi who took her to the Nakdong River, where she dumped some of the remains in a secluded park. In an attempt to make it look like the woman just disappeared, Young also kept her phone, ID, and wallet, and she thought she committed the perfect crime, but she was very wrong. On top of being caught on CCTV leaving the victim's home, Young was also acting very strange in the taxi drive to the river, and the driver even saw the bloodstained suitcase. So they were the one to actually call police and report what they saw, and upon investigating, police discovered a gruesome scene. Many of the woman's body parts were found at the park, but some were also found at Young's home. Authorities also found that her search history consisted of looking up how to kill someone for months leading up to the murder, and she even rented books from the library on how to get rid of a body. Young was soon arrested, but her story changed multiple times. She first told police that she only moved the woman's body after someone else killed her, and then she told them that she actually killed the tutor during an argument. But she ultimately told the police that she murdered the woman out of pure curiosity and just to see what it was like. After becoming obsessed with true crime TV shows and books, Young was charged with murder murder, desecration, and abandonment of a corpse. And prosecutors were originally wanting the death penalty because of how gruesome the crime was. Young pleaded for a more lenient sentence because she said she suffered from hallucinations and other mental health disorders at the time of the murder. But the judge ultimately ruled the murder was very premeditated and carefully planned, and instead she was sentenced to life in prison. In addition to that, she's also ordered to wear a tracking device for 30 years after. This kind of confused me, but from what I can find, those sentenced to life in prison in South Korea become eligible for parole after just 20 years behind bars. So I guess it's a real possibility for Young to be released early.
This man murdered his wife when she refused to go on a reality TV show. David Trons and Shanti Cooper Trons met on a dating website in 2013. They'd both been married before and took to the dating website to try and find somebody new to settle down with. They were really pleased to have met each other. It seemed like they had a lot in common and they wanted the same things out of life. They decided to give love a second chance and tie the knot. Now, Shanti actually had a son from a previous relationship, but this didn't really bother David. He actually told her that he had inherited between $4 and $6 million from his dad and he'd be able to look after them both. The three of them lived in Orlando together, and to the outside world, things looked picture perfect. However, just a year after they got married, Shanti would be found dead. It was April 2018 when a call came into emergency services. When they arrived at the couple's home, they found Shanti covered in blood. Now, David initially told emergency responders that he'd found her dead in the bathtub. He said he thought that she had slipped and fallen in. He said he found her partially submerged and he had grabbed her out of the bath. Now, he said that morning he'd last seen his wife before going out on a run with their dogs. Shanti's 8-year-old Jackson at this point was at school. Strangely though, Shanti's $15,000 diamond engagement ring was missing. Police started to wonder whether she'd been the victim of a robbery. Now, investigators looked into this initially, but it was weird that no other valuables were taken from the house. What was also very odd is that David had obviously told the police that he'd pulled Shanti out of the bath. He said he carried her to the living room, but interestingly, emergency responders reported that they were both completely dry when they got there. The actual truth of what had happened was sickening. They'd been having arguments due to finances. David had actually lied to Shanti about his supposed fortune and was obsessed with home renovations. He desperately wanted to appear on a TV show called Zombie House Flipping so that they would pay for some home updates for him. Now, the show was a reality show where contestants renovated properties into impressive homes. However, Shanti refused to take part in the show. She didn't see the point in this and didn't understand why David couldn't just pay for the renovations himself. David was furious at this. The pair started sleeping apart. David was in the garage and Shanti was in a one-bedroom studio apartment on the property. After David was ultimately exposed by Shanti for lying about his multi-million-pound fortune, David saw a way out. He brutally beat and strangled her in the studio of his home. He then tried to stage the scene like it was just an accidental death. Things started to crumble for David when the medical examiner determined the real cause of death. It was blunt force trauma and strangulation. David was arrested and charged with murder 4 months after his wife's body was discovered. He was sentenced to life in prison, and Shanti's son Jackson was left without a mum.
This pedophile has been connected to multiple serial killers and was the ringleader of one of the biggest pedophile rings in American history. Now, that's a loaded statement, but I do want to warn you, viewer discretion is advised going forward. So this is John David Norman. He was born in 1927, and between 1960 and 1998, he was convicted multiple times on charges of assaulting children and producing CP. But John David Norman wasn't your average pedophile. He was a businessman. And in fact, he started up and operated multiple CP production and distribution rings across the US. These rings included the Odyssey Foundation based in Dallas, which mailed CP to consumers, the Delta Project, which did the same thing in Illinois, Handy Andy from Pennsylvania. I mean, the list goes on and on. This guy was the sickest type of individual. Throughout his life, John David Norman went by at least 20 different aliases. But here's where things get disturbing. So John David Norman was arrested by the police multiple times on CP production and distribution charges, and on charges related to him assaulting kids. And when he was arrested, he was found in possession of a Rolodex which was basically a storage container for index cards. And each of these Rolodexes had 30,000 cards in them, with the names of at least 50 to 100,000 clients in the US. These clients of his included politicians, famous musicians, celebrities, and everyday people from everyday communities. But every single time after John David Norman was arrested and the police gained access to this Rolodex, it went missing. This not only happened once, but it happened multiple times. So obviously authorities were in on this whole operation and they were helping him keep it going. I mean, how do you lose track multiple times of an object that could give you leads on 50 to 100,000 pedophiles? Well, you lose track of it if there are people on there that you don't want investigated. But here's where things get disturbing. John David Norman has been linked to a number of famous serial killers, one of them being Dean Corll, the Candyman in Houston, Texas, who victimized, tortured, and murdered at least 30 young boys. He has been directly tied to John David Norman through the Odyssey Foundation, and obviously there is a darker connection there that we can explore in another TikTok. But one of John David Norman's employees was a guy named Philip Paskey. While John David Norman was in prison in Illinois, Philip Paskey helped him run his CP operation from behind prison bars. But eventually, Philip Paskey got out of prison, and guess who he started working for? That's right, John Wayne Gacy. That's right, Philip Paskey worked for John Wayne Gacy. Philip Paskey was one of the boys who helped Gacy all the time. He was in the crawl space. And if you don't know, John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young boys. Now, I obviously don't think John Wayne Gacy worked alone. There's actually data that shows that he was out of town at certain times during the murder spree, and the same can be said about Dean Corll. I mean, there are a lot of inconsistencies in these stories. But time and time again, John David Norman was allowed to go free. They would let him out on parole, then he would escape, he would start up another CP ring, he'd be arrested, he'd be let out on parole, he'd escape again. But he was eventually arrested and put into prison in California in 1998. But they just couldn't keep him there, and eventually they released him to a rural town. He was on parole, and he then violated the terms of his parole by giving a note to a 19-year-old grocery store bagger, giving him his contact information. He was then ordered back into state custody in 2009, and he died in 2011, thus taking all of his horrific secrets with him to the grave. Now, there is so much more to this story that I couldn't even begin to cover in one TikTok, so if you guys want me to dive deeper into this, I totally can. Let me know in the comments. This is a subject that has fascinated me for years, and this is something that nobody really knows about or talks about. We recently investigated a ring just like this being run in Michigan, and I produced an entire documentary about it. So if you want to help me spread awareness about these sorts of things and how they've happened and continue to happen, definitely go check out this documentary on YouTube. It got demonetized, but I'm not trying to make money off of this. I'm trying to spread awareness, so it doesn't matter to me. I just want people to see this information and learn it so they can understand that these things have happened and continue to happen.
There have been a lot of updates in the case of Nancy Ng, a woman who went missing during a yoga retreat to Guatemala last month, so let's talk about it. But be warned, these details will make your blood boil. If you need a full breakdown of the case, I posted an in-depth video about it last week, which you can go back and watch if you need to. The witness, who was the last person to see Nancy alive, has officially been publicly named. Her name is Christina Blasek, and she's a San Bernardino County public defender. Christina was on the same yoga retreat as Nancy, who disappeared on October 19th while kayaking on Lake Atitlan. It's now been 4 weeks since Nancy went missing, and Christina is only now speaking out for the first time through her attorney, Christopher Gardner. Nancy was last seen on video in her kayak on the lake, which was a little after 11 a.m. on the day she went missing. According to Christina, all 10 of the tourists went out with no safety training or life jackets, and once on the lake, they kind of all just went their separate ways. The water was reportedly becoming rough, so Christina started to head back to shore when she crossed paths with Nancy, who said she wanted to go swimming. According to Christina, she warned Nancy not to because the water was pretty rough and there was a good current, but Nancy reportedly jumped off her kayak anyway. Christina then says that she retrieved Nancy's kayak as it floated away, but she lost her grip. And after she got it for the second time, she turned around and Nancy was nowhere to be found. Christina then says that she immediately started screaming Nancy's name and screamed as much as she could, but she said that the water was pitch black and that she couldn't see anything, so she ultimately went back to shore for help. After she got to shore, she was greeted by the organizer of the retreat / yoga instructor, who has also since been publicly named. His name is Eddie Ramada, and according to both of them, once the distressed Christina got back to shore, he shielded her from onlookers and quickly rushed back to the hotel where all 10 of the tourists were staying. Christina allegedly told Guatemalan authorities what she saw, and they apparently told her that there was nothing that could be done and that Lake Atitlan is known for having people drown in it. This, of course, is everything that Christina told her attorney, who then released the statement. Nancy was then reported missing after hotel staff could not locate her. According to Lee Beal, the owner of the kayak rental company, the group was not scheduled to leave the next morning, but as we all know, within 12 hours of Nancy's disappearance, all 9 of the other tourists quickly checked out of the hotel without saying a word or talking to authorities, and they also did not pay for their excursion. But this is where things start to not really add up. After Nancy's family received a phone call from Eddie stating that she disappeared, they reached out to Christina, who again was the last person to see her alive, to see if she would talk to them and to help authorities locate Nancy. But Christina was silent. In fact, Nancy's family reached out to her multiple times, but she refused to say a word to them. Eddie reportedly told Nancy's family that Christina was too traumatized by the incident to speak with them. So they patiently waited for the police report, as that's all they could really do. And when they got it 5 days later, strangely enough, Christina's witness statement was nowhere in the official police report. There was actually not even one record of a single interview with Christina. Nancy's family and many others, including myself, are wondering why it took Christina so long to speak up and tell her side of what happened. Nancy's family has been begging her for information since the beginning, but for some reason it took her 4 weeks and getting an attorney to release any information. And according to the family, this is the first time that they're even hearing of this story. Nancy's family has since had to hire an independent search and rescue team called Black Wolf Helicopters, who have been the only ones to extensively search Lake Atitlan and the surrounding areas, as Guatemalan authorities called off the search after just 3 days. According to Chris Sharp of Black Wolf Helicopters, they've already searched roughly 95% of the lake and have also searched by land and air. However, since no one came forward and told authorities where Nancy even went into the lake, it's made finding her extremely hard and has severely hindered the investigation. According to Chris, Christina's statement about the water being pitch black is extremely valuable and would have been useful at the beginning of the investigation. They could have focused their search on the deepest part of the lake where the water is opaque, based on her description of the color change. But of course, this information only recently came to light 4 weeks later. Black Wolf Helicopters is hoping to bring in a sonar expert with this information to investigate deeper than 5 feet into the water. With the little information that witnesses are willing to give, time is of the essence to find Nancy. The fact that the only witness who last saw Nancy alive took 4 weeks to even just come forward is so bizarre to me. And it's just not fair to the family to have the only person who knows something just willingly not speak up when they need answers. I'd like to remind everyone of the GoFundMe in my bio for the family to help continue funding the search for Nancy. At this point, her family is questioning everything and they just want to bring Nancy home, as it's now been a month since she was last seen.
This is the crazy case of the cheerleader murder gone wrong. Wanda Holloway from Texas always wanted to be a cheerleader. She was born into a poor Buddhist family though, and her parents disagreed with the skimpy outfits that cheerleaders wore. When she turned 18, she married a man called Tony Harper. The pair had a son Shane in 1973 and then a daughter called Shanna in 1977. Despite them looking like a really happy family to the outside world, the couple were unhappy and they got a divorce. Wanda then decided to focus all of her attention on her kids. As Shanna grew up, Wanda started to try and encourage her to become a cheerleader like she was never able to. In 1989, Shanna was in 7th grade. She tried out but didn't make it as a cheerleader that year. Her mum encouraged her to try again the following year, but again, she didn't make it. She narrowly missed out being outdone by a student named Amber Heath. Next time, Wanda thought she would stop at nothing to ensure that her daughter made it. With tryouts set for March 1991, Wanda put a plan in motion. She would ensure that Amber was out of the picture. She hired an H-man and enlisted help from her former brother-in-law, Terry. Now, Wanda went to Terry because he'd got a bit of a troubled past, but nothing as extreme as being an H-man. He had a few driving offences, but there was nothing on his record of a violent nature. Wanda went to him with her plan, and she proposed that she wanted to either unalive Amber or her mum. Wanda figured that if Amber's mum, Verna, was deceased, Amber would just be so distracted and distraught that she wouldn't try out to be a cheerleader that year. Shanna would then be able to sweep in and take the place instead. Now, Terry went along with this, but secretly then went to police and informed them of what was going on. He agreed to wear a wire so they could collect evidence and arrest her. In January 1991, Terry wore a secret microphone while discussing plans with Wanda. They agreed that he would unalive the mum for $2,500. Wanda was recorded chillingly stating, "I don't care what you do with her, you can keep her in Cuba for 15 years, I want her gone." She offered her diamond earrings to Terry as payment. With the recording, police were able to then arrest her. On the 30th of January 91, she was charged with solicitation of capital murder. She was found guilty at her trial and was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but there was a twist. Shockingly, the trial was declared a mistrial, and in 1996 she pleaded no contest and got 10 years in prison and a fine. Then she was released just 6 months into her sentence. Shanna actually spoke out following the conviction and confessed she didn't even want to be a cheerleader. The mum and daughter now have a very strained relationship.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up." Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Mystery woman was killed over 40 years ago. Police now know her identity and are hunting her killer. A 23-year-old woman who was killed has now been identified, and her killer is still out there. 40 years after her remains were discovered in Nashville, the mystery woman has been identified as Michelle Inman. She was identified through genetic genealogy. Her skeletal remains were discovered by a driver who was having trouble with their car. They pulled over back in March 1985 and discovered her body. It was determined that she was killed around 2 to 5 months before her body was found. Investigators were actually able to find her brother through the new information, but he said that he hadn't been in contact with her for over 40 years. This is quite obvious because it's been over 40 years since she died. We still have no idea who is responsible for her death.
These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so this humanoid creature was caught on camera chasing a car at very high speeds. This thing or human is completely naked and is running at insanely high speeds. This video was captured by a group of friends who were just hanging out driving around when suddenly they started getting chased by this thing in their car. Just put yourself in this situation and imagine how scary it would be. Luckily nobody was hurt and they got away, so here's the video. So yeah, let me know if you think this is just a random human completely tweaking, or some sort of humanoid creature with insanely fast speeds. Either way, this video is absolutely terrifying nonetheless, and I really hope this never happens to me or any of you.
I found a baby in my mother's freezer after she passed away. My name is Adam Smith, and I was 37 years old when I made this horrifying discovery that will haunt me for life. While I was cleaning and sorting through the belongings of my recently deceased mother, who succumbed to cancer, I felt a deep sadness, but I knew it was something I had to do. Since I was a child, my mother would place a box in our freezer, and I was forbidden to touch it. She explained to me that it contained a slice of wedding cake that she wanted to keep. When I was younger, I never questioned this, but with each move, she would always place that box back in the freezer without further explanation. As I was preparing to empty the contents of her fridge, there was that box she had forbidden me to touch. Since I had to sort through her things, I opened it, only to discover a baby carefully placed inside. It instantly struck me that she had mentioned something when I was younger. She had whispered to me, "You had a little sister who died when you were 8. I believe this could be my deceased sister, but what could have possibly happened?
This is how a ham sandwich and a can of beer helped to catch criminals. Operation Venetic was a police investigation into the use of encrypted phones. Criminals have historically used the EncroChat network as they felt safe and secure to chat openly about criminal activity. However, the EncroChat servers were actually taken down in 2020 following an investigation by the National Crime Agency. Criminals Richard Wiley and Richard Whiteside were using encrypted phones to discuss their criminal activity. Staggeringly, a photo of a ham sandwich and a can of Stella helped to catch the pair. The photos were matched to Richard Whiteside's address in Blackpool after police examined the surroundings in the photos. There were distinctive items in the pictures that matched the property. Police were then able to identify that the men were actually the users of the EncroChat code names Snail and Peppershirt. Richard Wiley was jailed for 6 years for conspiracy to supply substances, transfer and conceal criminal property, and substance supplying. Richard Whiteside was jailed for 4 years.
This is the scariest story about the baby's first words. There was a woman named Mary who had a 19-month-old baby girl. She loved her baby so much and couldn't wait for her to say her first words. One night when Mary was cooking dinner, her husband called her out into the living room. He said their daughter was trying to say something. After Mary and her husband watched their baby mumble for a bit, the baby then said, "Mommy dies." Mary and her husband both looked at each other in confusion. Mary thought she misheard her baby, but by the look on her husband's face, they heard the same thing. The couple then laughed it off and went on with their night. The next morning, Mary was on her way to work when she suddenly got into a fatal car accident. She was then immediately rushed to the hospital where her daughter and husband were waiting for her. When Mary's daughter and husband went into the room she was in, Mary's daughter pointed at her and said, "Mommy dies." And minutes later, Mary died from her injuries. Nobody knows how the baby knew her mom was going to die. This led to Mary's husband resenting the baby because he believed his baby had some cause in his wife's death. He then put the baby up for adoption not even a year later. To this day, nobody knows where the girl is, and many people wonder if she's still predicting people's deaths.
I had thought that I had seen everything when it came to cults, but you are not prepared for what this cult believes. So HBO just released this documentary about the Love is One cult, which was run by this woman, Amy Carlson, who calls herself Mother God. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but she believed she was controlled by the spirit of Robin Williams, and this yassified version of Saint Germain. Also, I cover a lot of dark stuff on this page, so you should follow along. She also said she could channel and get advice from this galactic federation of dead celebrities. There's Mr. Rogers, Carrie Fisher, Steve Irwin, and randomly Donald Trump, who is not dead. But Robin Williams is at the top, and so the cult believes they're getting a lot of advice through Robin Williams, so they'll say things like, so one of the beliefs that this cult has is that one day Robin Williams is going to arrive in a spaceship to take Mother God away so that she can spiritually ascend. He also told her that she can only be 103 pounds to get on the spaceship, which is why she's trying to lose a lot of weight. Eventually, Mother God starts getting sicker and sicker, and also bluer and bluer because of the colloidal silver supplements they won't stop giving her, and everyone thinks, oh my god, Robin Williams must be coming on his spaceship really soon to help Mother ascend. Eventually, she passes away, and guess what? Shockingly, Robin Williams does not descend in an intergalactic spaceship to come collect the 103-pound body of Mother God. And so the cult members just have her body. They don't know what to do with it. They thought Robin Williams was gonna come. So they hang out with it for 12 days until the police finally show up. Anyways, this whole thing is a trip. You just gotta watch it to believe it.
Child Protection Services investigated this little girl's family over 6 times. Because they couldn't prove she was being abused, she was then murdered. On the 2nd of October 2023, authorities raced to a petrol station in Topeka at 6:30. They'd been alerted to a reportedly injured little girl. The girl in question was 5-year-old Zoe Felix. Tragically, the little girl was pronounced dead at the scene. The scene was nearby to a homeless camp, and neighbours reported that Zoe and her family had been camping in the area. It transpired that Child Protection had actually received countless reports regarding Zoe's welfare. 6 of those had been assigned for further investigation. The documents dated back to September 2022, and they stated poor conditions in the home and possible substance use in presence of a child. There was reports of dog feces all over the house and the little girl's basic needs not being taken care of. Shockingly, Zoe's mum had been arrested for driving while under the influence, with Zoe in the front seat of the car. Zoe had been placed in police protective custody but given back to her dad just the same evening. Child Protection investigated Zoe's family just a month before she was murdered, and they deemed the living conditions were fine. On the tragic day in question, Zoe was reportedly AR'd and killed. Michael Cherry has been arrested on suspicion of this. He's a 25-year-old homeless male and is believed to have been known to Zoe's family.
Hid and transported drugs in the coffins of American soldiers killed in combat during the Vietnam War. I am Frank Lucas, born on September 9th, 1930, in North Carolina. I grew up in a poor family, and after witnessing my cousin's murder by the Ku Klux Klan, I left for Harlem, New York. There, I became involved in organized crime initially working for Bumpy Johnson, a respected local mobster. After Bumpy's death, I took control of the organization and became a notorious drug baron. I innovated by importing pure heroin directly from the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia, using coffins of soldiers who died in combat during the Vietnam War. My heroin, nicknamed Blue Magic, was of higher quality and cheaper than that of my competitors, allowing me to become very rich and powerful. However, my wealth and ostentatious lifestyle attracted the attention of authorities, and Special Agent Richard Bumpkin was one of the key players in the drug bust. Richard Roberts eventually arrested me in 1975. After a high-profile trial, I was sentenced to 70 years in prison in 1976. However, I agreed to cooperate with authorities and testify against numerous corrupt police officers, leading to a reduction in my sentence. Eventually, I was released in 1991. After my release, I attempted to lead an honest life by becoming an entrepreneur and working with my family. My story was brought to the screen in the film American Gangster, released in 2007, with Denzel Washington portraying me. I lived the rest of my life away from crime until my death on May 30th, 2019.
This is Two Girls, One Cup, one of the most disgusting shock videos on the internet explained. I'm explaining this off memory and other people's comments. There is no way I watch this video again because it's that gross. The video is 1 minute long, and as it starts, you hear a piano track over the video and you see two girls making out. But at around 10 seconds in, it gets absolutely sickening. One of the girls gets a glass cup and defecates in it, filling it all the way to the top. A jump cut then occurs and it shows the two women licking the feces in the cup like it's ice cream. It cuts again and it shows one of the girls rubbing the feces around her mouth, and the video then cuts again, and it shows the two girls making out with feces in their mouth and all over their faces. The next scene, one of the girls sticks her fingers down her throat, trying to make herself vomit into the glass as the other girl licks it. The next scene, it shows one of the girls standing up and the other one is on her knees. The one standing up then pukes directly onto the face of the girl on her knees. The final scene shows both girls completely covered in feces as it's even overflowing their mouths. And this is where the video finally concludes. This video is absolutely sickening, and when I tell you not to watch it, don't watch it. I know I say that for all the videos I cover, but this one isn't brutal or gory. It's just plain out disgusting and you really just don't want to see it. You can watch reactions on YouTube of people watching this for the first time. Joe Rogan even has his reaction video up from years ago.
I killed my mother after discovering the secret she had hidden from me all my life, and I am getting out of prison this month. My name is Gypsy Rose Blanchard, and I am a young American woman. Since I was 3 months old, my mother, Dee Blanchard, has made me believe, and everyone else, including doctors, that I am sick. She started by inventing respiratory problems, and when the doctor concluded it was sleep apnea, she wasn't convinced. She consulted other doctors and told them I had different symptoms, but the worst part of it all is that I didn't have any. However, I was too young to understand. I underwent treatments and surgeries I never needed, which caused me to lose all my teeth. As I was always in a wheelchair, my legs were not strong enough to walk. She also shaved my head to make it look like I had cancer. My case moved people and the media who thought I was sick, and I began receiving financial aid from various institutions. My mother started falsifying my records and changed my age. However, as I grew older, I realized that the test results were different from what my mother told me. Everything went on like this until I met Nicholas on an online platform in 2015. I told him about my situation and we concluded that I had to get rid of my mother. Finally, after months of preparation, one evening, I let Nicholas into my house and I locked myself in the bathroom. While Nicholas stabbed my mother to death, we then fled the scene. And a few days later, I made a Facebook post confessing my murder, which alarmed my relatives, and they alerted the police. When they discovered my mother's body and I was missing, they thought I had been kidnapped. But when they found me, my mother's secret was revealed. I could walk perfectly, and I was happy. I confessed everything, and my true story was revealed. Nicholas was sentenced to life in prison, and I received a 10-year sentence. On December 28th, 2023, I will be free. I do not regret what I did. I can finally live a normal life.
This is the most haunted hotel in Texas, the Hotel Galvez in Galveston. On June 10th, 1911, at 6 o'clock p.m., the Hotel Galvez first opened its doors, only a few years after a massive hurricane destroyed Galveston. The hotel is named after Bernardo de Galvez, who discovered Galveston, and his ghost has been seen walking through these cursed halls. For years, the Galvez Hotel was one of the most recognizable hotels in the state of Texas. And in the year 1937, President Franklin D. Roosevelt actually made the Galvez his official summer White House. But if you want to see a ghost, you have to head to the 5th floor. It's in room 501 where the most famous specter of the hotel resides, Audra, the ghost bride. As the story goes, Audra's fiancé left Galveston on a sailing trip, and after he returned they were set to be married. She would wait in room 501, pacing through the halls and climbing to the turrets of the hotel, waiting for her fiancé to return. But one day, after learning that her husband's ship had capsized, she climbed up to one of the turrets in the hotel and took her own life. Tragically, only a few days after she took her own life, her husband returned to shore. Her spirit has been seen wandering the hallways and has made her presence known. Then you have the music hall. This part of the hotel was reportedly built on the mass grave of orphans and nuns. Children and ghost nuns have made their presence clear in this room. If you remember some of the history from the Galveston hurricane, almost the entirety of Galveston was wiped out and thousands died, including nuns and children from a local orphanage. Their spirits have been seen wandering the halls of this famous haunted hotel. But apart from the paranormal history, the regular history of this place is crazy. So many presidents have stayed here, a lot of different old-time celebrities, and a lot of this stems from when Galveston was known as Vegas of the South. And the interior of this hotel is beautiful. It's almost like you're stepping back into the 1920s. But when you go back in time, you're almost always guaranteed to find a ghost. One of the most famous specters is a violent ghost who haunts the men's restroom across the hall from the music hall. I actually investigated that room a few years ago, and what happened in there was terrifying to me. There's also been a young girl seen bouncing a red ball wandering throughout the hallways, and when employees have approached her, she simply vanishes. There's also a historic photo hanging in the hotel that was taken in 1911 that claims to have captured a spectral figure in it. So let me know, would you stay in this haunted hotel? I did, and for more ghostly content, check out my YouTube channel.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
This case is horrific and really interesting all at the same time when you do some digging. So there's a big conspiracy theory around this case, and I'll explain more about that at the end. This is Antron Singleton, aka Big Lurch, and he is a rapper turned murderer and cannibal. Antron gained his nickname Big Lurch due to his height. He was 6'5" tall. He had quite a successful rap career, and he'd often rap about serial killers such as Jeffrey Dahmer. His rap career was actually taking off, but in the year 2000 he got into a car wreck and he broke his neck. He was discharged and sent home with painkillers, but they weren't enough, and he quickly turned to street drug PCP to relieve his pain. He would take this drug regularly and for weeks on end, and it would cause something called excited delirium, and Antron started having hallucinations. Antron lived with his friend and his friend's girlfriend, Tanisha Ysays, in Los Angeles, California. On the night of April 10th, 2002, Tanisha was found dead in her apartment by a friend. Her chest had been ripped open and she had a 3-inch blade wedged in her shoulder blade. She had teeth marks on her face and her lungs had been ripped out. Antron was actually found standing out in the street covered in blood and looking up to the sky, barking like a dog. Allegedly, he was also holding one of Tanisha's lungs in his hands. The lung apparently also had bite marks in it, and human flesh was found in Antron's digestive tract. He was, of course, arrested. Now, there is a conspiracy theory. I've looked into it, and a lot of people don't believe that Antron murdered Tanisha. They think that he was framed. The police claimed that when they picked Antron up, he was absolutely covered in blood, but his booking photos prove otherwise. People are also doubting how they managed to retrieve human flesh from his digestive tract without performing surgery. And apparently the bite marks on Tanisha's face weren't that of a human, they were dog bites. Antron claims that Tanisha's boyfriend got them both high on PCP and he was the one that committed the murder while they were both passed out. Even Tanisha's own mother doesn't believe that it was Antron. She said that Tanisha's boyfriend was abusive and the day before she died, she'd packed her bags and threatened to leave.
She believes that Antron was set up, but she wasn't allowed to testify in court. And in November 2003, he was found guilty of Tanisha's murder and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He's currently incarcerated at Salinas Valley State Prison in Monterey County. This is 30-year-old Nestor Hernandez, and he's currently facing the death penalty for double murder. I'm about to play some footage of the day that double murder took place, and the sound is absolutely horrific. It's his girlfriend basically begging the police not to shoot him after he's just murdered 2 people. What makes it even more shocking is that it's in the labour and delivery suite at the hospital where she gave birth, and their newborn son is also in the same room.
Over here, please, come out. Come outside. Okay, I'm Robert. What's your name, partner? What's your name? Talk to me. All I'm asking. Let them outside, please. Please. Let them out of the room.
This wasn't Nestor's first encounter with the law. In May 2011, he was actually sentenced to 150 days in jail for stealing a car. In December that same year, he robbed a man at gunpoint outside a convenience store and was found in possession of a gun and heroin. For those charges, he entered a plea deal in which he received 2 years in exchange for a guilty plea. In 2014, after his prison sentence, he began dating Selena, and they were a dangerous match made in heaven. They were both involved in substance abuse and on a clear path to destruction. In 2015, they both attacked a woman in North Dallas while she was unlocking her front door. They hit her, knocked her to the ground, and then tied her up in the bathroom before fleeing with her car and $3,000. They were arrested the same day and given 8 years and 5 years in jail for aggravated assault. Nestor only served 6 of those 8 years, and he was released on parole with an ankle monitor. He was supposed to report his movements to his parole officer, but he actually ended up cutting off his ankle monitor and going into hiding. It took a few months, but in April 2021, the police found Nestor and he was sentenced to just 4 months in jail. He was then released in October, again with an ankle monitor. Selena soon became pregnant with Nestor's baby, and it seems absolutely insane to me that he was released with just an ankle monitor, despite his criminal, violent past, with little support, rehabilitation, or monitoring. On October 21st, 2022, Selena gave birth at the Methodist Dallas Medical Center in Texas, and the day after, just after 10 a.m., Nestor came to visit. He'd been drinking most of the morning, and as you can see from this footage, he actually walked into the hospital holding a beer. And it's insane to me that he wasn't stopped at this point and searched, considering the fact that he was also on parole with an ankle monitor. Nestor had actually managed to convince himself that Selena was cheating on him, and he came to the hospital looking for this non-existent man. When he couldn't find him, he went to Selena's room. He was armed with a gun, and despite their newborn son being in the same room, he took out his gun and began to hit Selena over the head with it repeatedly. Healthcare workers Katie and Jeanette heard the commotion and came to see what was going on. When they entered the room, Nestor shot them both, killing them. Nestor then reloaded his gun, and it's assumed that he was going to come out into the hallway and continue shooting. But when he came out, police shot him in the leg and he retreated back into the room. That's when the standoff with police began, and Nestor eventually did give up the gun and he was able to be detained. CPS have taken Selena and Nestor's baby into care. She is allowed to see him every day, but she is not allowed custody. And Nestor has been charged with capital murder. It carries a minimum sentence of life in prison and a maximum sentence of the death penalty. James Bulger is a name that most of us know. His murder sent shockwaves through the whole country 30 years ago, and it still remains to this day one of the most horrific child murders in the UK. One of the most shocking things about this murder is that it was committed by 2 boys who were just 10 years old. On the 12th of February 1993, an innocent shopping trip turned into every parent's worst nightmare for James's mum, Denise. They were at the Strand Shopping Centre in Merseyside, and while Denise's back was turned for less than 60 seconds, James was lured away by 2 young boys. When Denise turned around and realised that James wasn't behind her anymore, her blood ran cold. She searched frantically for James, but he was gone. Tragically, his mutilated body was found 2 days later by a group of children on some railway tracks. John Venables and Robert Thompson had gone out that day fully intending on abducting a child. They'd actually intended on taking this child outside and pushing them into oncoming traffic. What they actually ended up doing to James was far worse. Just a quick trigger warning here, the details of James's death are really hard to listen to. Some of it is actually too graphic to talk about on here. John and Robert led James to the Leeds and Liverpool Canal, where they dropped him on his head, injuring his face. A witness had actually seen the boys with James and said that James had been crying his eyes out. A further 38 people saw them that day leading James through Liverpool, but nobody intervened. Eventually, James was led up a steep bank onto some railway tracks. One of the boys threw paint into James's eyes. They kicked him, stamped on him, threw rocks at him, and then they stripped him naked and dropped a 22-pound metal bar onto his head, causing 10 skull fractures. The two boys then laid James across the railway tracks and covered his head with rubble. After they left the scene, James's body was cut in half by a train. A forensic pathologist determined that James was already dead when he was struck by the train, and he'd suffered 42 separate injuries, that many that it was impossible to determine which one was the fatal blow. Police quickly obtained CCTV from the shopping centre showing two unidentified boys leading James away. A witness came forward that had seen these images on the news, and the two boys were arrested. The fact that the two suspects were so young came as a shock to absolutely everybody working on the case. The boys had paint on their clothes that matched the paint on James's face. They both had blood on their shoes, and a bruise on James's face matched the sole of Robert's shoe perfectly. It was clear to police that these two boys were the ones that had tortured and murdered James. To show just how young these two were, during police questioning, Robert actually asked the police if James had been taken to hospital to get him alive again. John Venables and Robert Thompson were both charged with murder and appeared in court, where they were remanded in custody awaiting trial. The trial began on November 1st, 1993, and it was conducted as an adult trial, with both boys sat on raised chairs so they could see out of the dock. The boys' police interviews were played in court, and multiple items of evidence were also shown, including bloodied rocks and the bar that was dropped on James's head. The pathologist spent a full 33 minutes in court describing James's injuries, which shows just how many there were. His brain damage was extensive and included a hemorrhage, and there was multiple injuries to his legs. Both boys were found guilty of James's murder, making them the youngest convicted murderers in the 20th century, and the judge recommended a minimum term of just 8 years. A petition was then created to increase the boys' sentences, and it was signed almost 300,000 times, meaning that the boys' sentences were increased to 15 years. However, in the year 2000, the boys' lawyers appealed to the Court of Human Rights, saying that they hadn't been given a fair trial as they were too young to understand an adult court, and it was then reduced back down to 8 years. In June 2001, both boys were released, given new identities, and moved to secret locations. As far as we know, since their release, Robert has lived life out of the public eye. However, John was rearrested multiple times. In 2010, police visited John at his flat, and he was found to be trying to destroy the hard drive on his computer. It was analysed, and it was found to contain child SA material involving children as young as 2. John was returned to prison for 2 years, and he was released in 2013 with another new identity. 4 years later, he was again recalled to prison for the same offence, child SA material on his computer. He was given another 3 years, and he was actually refused parole in 2020. He was again up for parole just last month, and the result of this hearing hasn't been revealed yet. It's due to be revealed at the end of next week. I just hope they do the right thing and keep him in prison, because he's clearly still a danger to children.
calling this the most horrific fraternity hazing ever in the United States. This is how one night at university can destroy your life forever. Danny Santulli was 18 years old and a freshman at the Uni of Missouri. In October 2021, Danny was captured on CCTV being blindfolded and led downstairs in an event named Pledge Dad Reveal Night. Danny was made to drink a litre of straight vodka by himself. At around 10:55, Danny collapsed and some of the frat members were seen carrying him to a sofa. Around midnight, Danny was captured on cameras sliding off the sofa, and shortly after he was found unconscious with blue lips. Shockingly, instead of calling an ambulance for Danny, the frat members piled him into a car, dropping him on the way. They drove him to hospital, but at this point he was already in cardiac arrest. Danny had to be resuscitated and spent the next 6 weeks in intensive care. Prior to this evening, Danny had been left needing stitches and crutches after he'd been forced to climb inside of a bin with broken glass inside. 2 nights before the night in question, Danny broke down in tears on the phone to his sister and told her about how stressed he felt about it all. His family had begged him to quit the pledge, but he didn't want to be ridiculed. This is Danny now. He will need full-time care for the rest of his life. He's now severely brain damaged, is blind, and cannot walk or talk. 2 former students are set to go to trial over this case.